Just yesterday, I witnessed a miracle, the birth of a new creature, right there in my office in the church, right there on that small conference table in my office. It was the birth of a butterfly. A butterfly. What a great spring and Easter symbol. But more than just a symbol, it was real. It was a real butterfly emerging for the first time in the world. It had found the final stage of its metamorphosis right there in my office. But before it was born, it had to die multiple times. Last week, I was the recipient of a gift from Marty Haddad in our church, and I tell of this event with her permission. As many of you might know, she raises butterflies. Marty says she began this work when her daughter Michelle, who grew up in this church, was writing a college essay. The essay was about butterfly metamorphosis. Metamorphosis, I'm assuming, was a good subject for a young person looking to enter college. She and her mom ordered a kit through the mail, and it arrived with 5 small caterpillars. And Michelle witnessed the metamorphosis of the caterpillars to butterflies over the next several weeks. In the college application, she said, "I watched the caterpillar acrobatics, and my throat got tight all over again as I pictured myself writing and struggling in the throes of metamorphosis." She says in the essay that she watched the process, quote, "like an expectant mother myself. And now I know what she's talking about." Marty gave me the chrysalis last week in a little plastic cup. It was hanging at the top of the cup to a piece of women's nylon stocking that was stretched over the top so that the cup would get plenty of air for the creature. The chrysalis was just hanging there. Marty said at some point it would turn into a butterfly. So I put it on my office table and would occasionally check in on it. It was there day after day, just hanging there, doing nothing, just hanging there. Well, yesterday morning when I came to the office, I noticed that the color had changed. It had been sort of a green color, light green, and suddenly it had become dark overnight, I guess. And I looked, and there were markings on the outer shape of the chrysalis that I thought perhaps could be the markings of butterfly wings. Then a few hours later, after I got busy with something, I looked, and behold, there was a butterfly with full color wings hanging from the top of this cup. It was not making any movements, it was just hanging there. I assume being new to birth, it was letting its wings dry and just getting acclimated to life in this new episode. Marty tells me that the skin of the chrysalis doesn't just drop away, that the outer shell of the chrysalis itself actually becomes the butterfly wings. It actually makes a metamorphosis to the actual wings from deep in the DNA of the creature, I assume. Well, I yelled out to Amy, our church administrator, and showed off our new butterfly. She suggested putting it in the church garden, which I thought was a good idea with all the plants and everything out there. And as I left for the garden, I yelled back at Amy, "I feel like I just birthed a baby." Indeed, in some ways, I had witnessed the birth. I was present at a miracle. A small miracle, yes, an everyday miracle, yes, but a miracle nonetheless. The metamorphosis of a beautiful creature that slowly changed, that just, in its own mysterious way, listened to the call of nature, went through all the motions it needed to go through, the motions planted into it deep in its DNA, going through, I was told, 4 distinct life stages from egg to larva, that's the caterpillar stage, to the chrysalis stage, to the adult stage. In a sense, dying at each of these stages, no longer what it was before, open, ready, willing to become what it needed to be in the next stage, then the next, then the next. Becoming. In the Christian New Testament, there are 4 Gospels. Each of the Gospels tells of the story of Jesus, and each of the Gospels comes from a different source, so it tells that story from a slightly different perspective, from a different refraction. The Gospel of Mark is thought by scholars to likely be the oldest of the Gospels, and in fact, 2 of the other Gospel accounts, Matthew and Luke, seem to have used Mark as a source because the narrative in their stories line up so well with the narrative in Mark. But Mark, as each gospel is distinct from the others, and one way it's distinct is in its ending. Mark speaks of the resurrection at the end of the story, but only in an oblique way. There's not a lot of detail about what happens in the resurrection. In Mark's version, after the crucifixion of Jesus, the body was taken to a tomb. One morning, the morning we now associate as the first Easter, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, approached the tomb ready to embalm the body, as was the custom. And walking up to the tomb, they see that the large rock that had been placed at the entrance to the tomb has been moved. Well, this is alarming to them. They enter the tomb, and there is a young man, the story says, dressed in a white robe, so that suggests an angel of some sort. And this young man announces that Jesus of Nazareth is not here. He has been raised, just as Jesus himself had predicted. The women then flee in terror. The ending of the oldest gospel account is stark. So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. So, the Gospel of Mark ends in silence and fear. End of story. Not exactly the glorious Easter morning you might think. The women, and we imagine certainly the disciples and so many others who were in the larger community of Jesus at the time, thought that with the death of Jesus was the death of their community. Their leader was gone. Their rabbi was gone. Their friend, their healer, was gone. Their leader, this prophet who taught so many strange and wonderful things, had been publicly executed in a way that was unusually cruel and created actually to instill terror in others. It was a form of official public terrorism of the day. Jesus was gone. Their community would die with him, and tyranny would continue to thrive. Now, if you look in your Bibles and you look at the end of the Gospel of Mark, you will see a longer ending also appended there. If you're using a critical Bible or a good study Bible, the notes will say that this was likely added later, not of the original manuscript. Most scholars think that others came in and created a longer ending, perhaps in response to the more glorious Easter accounts in the other Gospels. Now, I'm not saying that Mark is right and the other Gospelers are wrong. This is to say that I think Mark had his finger on something in ending the Gospel account this way. One thing that draws me to Mark's Gospel over the others is its brevity and its starkness. In Mark's story, the resurrection is terrifying. The metamorphosis is feared. That we humans, unlike our butterfly friends, maybe do not go through the stages of growth so easily. The woman at the tomb, the storyteller says, said nothing to anyone. In reality, of course, we know that didn't happen. The community continued to speak through the generations, to remember their time with Jesus. and eventually a new faith tradition was formed. They loved their rabbi so much that it was as if he still walked among them, so death did not have the final word. It's true, we're not butterflies. Human beings are naturally more complex. We are not mere creatures. We are creatures with self-reflective consciousness. This is what separates us from the animal kingdom. We know that we know. And out of all of this knowing has come so much. Our science, our literature, the arts, philosophy, theology, so many disciplines. We're not butterflies. Life is difficult for us humans, and yet maybe there is still a voice in our beings that calls us now and then and reminds us that it's time to change, time to let go, time to let in new things. We are not butterflies. And while we don't have an innate sense in our DNA of exactly what we need to do to get to the next stage, while our lives are more complicated, I do think that we exist amid a greater context of life if we are wise to listen to it. Hush, hush, somebody's calling my name. Several weeks ago, I mentioned to you the themes of spirit, soul, and love. I guess they're my new trinity. I do think we live as part of a living, loving, organic reality beyond us. That we are not independent creatures living in an uncaring universe, but interdependent beings living amid a living reality that we need to pay attention to, listen to, see with new eyes. It's a reality we have a hand in creating and shaping in, as one of our popular songs says, giving life the shape of justice. In our Unitarian Universalist tradition, we speak a lot of our principles, our 7 principles, and there's discussion among us nationally of an 8th principle. You'll remember that the principles are part of a covenant between the congregations of our National Association. And right after these principles in the fuller document is the second important part of that document. It says, the living tradition we share draws from many sources. It then lists those sources, the first of which is direct experience. Direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces that create and uphold life. In fact, this is one of the distinctives in Unitarian Universalism, that our first source, not the only, but our first source is our own experience, but not just our experience of that transcending mystery and wonder of which we are a part. That transcending mystery and wonder is described and experienced in many ways in many faith traditions, including one sacred story of resurrection we encounter today. Many other religious traditions have their accounts of renewal, rebirth, transformation. We tell these stories, all of them, to chart our experiences amid this transcending mystery and wonder. It is my hope for you this Easter, and especially my hope for all of us in this particular community of faith, First Unitarian Church of Orlando, at this time in your history, that we might slow down, observe, listen to the monitions of spirit, soul, and love that move among us and in the world. Perhaps the young essayist seeking to be a college student was right, that we are all struggling in the throes of metamorphosis. Each of us individually, the congregation itself, as it envisions its future and its own becoming, especially at this critical point on the cusp of a new generation of ministry. Whatever is the stated mission of any of our congregations, and again, as you well know, each of our congregations states its own mission in its own articulate way. I have come to believe in my practice of serving our wider association that our mission in Unitarian Universalism, at least my mission in Unitarian Universalism, is simply to do what I can to transform lives and help heal our world. I don't pretend to be a superhero able to do that, for no one minister can do that. No one minister can coach or lead a congregation to do that either. It's a deep, systemic mystery and miracle of how a congregation goes through the process of transformation. And it's not all accomplished in one period of interim or transitional ministry, even though some of our resumes might suggest that. It's an ongoing movement of the Spirit, the soul, and the love that moves through you and among you as a congregation that will take you into your next generation of ministry. But let's start in letting that transcending mystery and wonder do its work. Let's let go and be resurrected. So may it be. Amen.